Welcome to the Cycling in Alignment podcast, an examination of cycling as a practice and dialogue about the integration of sport and right relationship to your life.
Greetings and salutations, Space Monkeys. Before we begin our episode, a brief reminder that this podcast depends on support from the audience. The reason I am able to continue with this project is because of the support of patrons. If you are a member of my audience and you feel I've offered you insight or added value to your cycling journey, please consider a visit to my website, colbypierce.com, where you can make a contribution to the Cycling in Alignment podcast. You can support the show for as little as $8 for a one-time contribution, or choose to subscribe as an ongoing member. Thank you for your consideration. Here's your reminder to think critically, act intuitively, and pedal consciously. Hey superstars, check this out. Today I've got a conversation with Austin Einhorn. He's a coach who moved to Colorado from the Santa Cruz area maybe about a year ago, and I found him through a mutual client. And I started following his work online, and I began to appreciate the way Austin thinks critically about various different topics. He just doesn't take the standard narrative on things for granted. And I think this is often parallel to my own line of thought. So as I studied him more, I realized that I had some things to learn from him. In some ways, I think we're colleagues, and in other ways, I think I'm learning what he's figured out, which is great. He comes from a background that's more involved with ball and stick sports, as he calls them. He himself is a volleyball player. He's a bigger guy, about 220 pounds, 6'3", 6'4", something like that. And he's worked with a lot of baseball players and gymnasts and also some cyclists, which we'll talk about in this pod. And he sort of made a name for himself in solving niggly problems that won't go away. That is, hard to solve problems for athletes centered around pain. So I found our conversation to be quite interesting. I did do a three-day course in person with Austin about a month ago. And that was really quite a nice experience, very enlightening. And some of the ways he looks at the human body are definitely parallel to my own, as I mentioned, but others are novel. So in any case, I thought it would be good to have him on the pod, and he agreed, and I'm very glad. This was a long conversation, so we're definitely going to release this in two parts. I think we were almost 2.5 hours in total. I'm sure you will enjoy the conversation with Austin Einhorn, and stay tuned to the end of the pod to find out more about how to follow his work if you're inclined. But the simple way is to go to Instagram and type in Austin Einhorn. It's pretty much like it sounds phonetically, but AUSTIN EINHORN. And you'll find his work there. In the meantime, enjoy the podcast, and thank you as always for listening. Austin, welcome to the podcast.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man.
Good meeting you.
Yeah.
Having a new colleague and friend in Boulder.
Yeah.
I mean, we're nearly neighbors.
We are.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't seen you walk past my house yet, but.
I haven't gone on Hawthorne too much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
You came from California?
Santa Cruz.
Yeah. All right. Very good. About what, a year ago?
Yeah, about a year ago.
Okay. Okay.
And I mean, it was, as soon as I got here, I wish I'd moved here sooner.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Much more my vibe type of people, atmosphere,
Mm-hmm.
like the mountains way more than the beach.
Okay.
I'm not one to just I don't really care for water sports, but also
yeah.
I'm not going to go lay in the sand. It's just not my thing. I'd rather go do something harder. Or
You're not a
more
surfer?
Nature. No,
So-
I never really cared much for the water.
We got a visiting arachnid here, or he's a
Oh,
beetle.
yeah.
But,
Cool.
yeah. We have 3 on our podcast today. Myself, Austin, and whatever that is.
Insect.
Insect.
Yeah.
Insecticon. So tell me where you want to start. What's on your mind? What's going on? What's coming past your radar recently? Let's do an intro first. Who are you?
My name's Austin Einhorn. Primarily, I work with a lot of professional athletes on unsolved injuries. I don't really know how else to describe what it is that I do, because when people ask that question and people are trying to envision what it is that I do when they're listening to me right now, I could say like rehab / strength and conditioning, but as you saw in the course, it doesn't really fit into that. So I would guess it's like much more critical thinking infused with like rehab, strength and conditioning, plus a little Sherlock Holmes. Like unsolved injuries are my favorite thing these days. And what I always get fired up about is like, God, so many people are struggling with pain for years, and a lot of common beliefs in the rehab and strength and conditioning industry are extremely limiting and like anchored in scarcity. Like, oh, you just need to get your glutes stronger, bud.
Yeah.
Or you just haven't done enough reps, or these things take time. And something I was thinking about in my like writing this morning is just the sooner a coach, clinician, what have you, a service provider is willing to admit that they are wrong, the sooner they can get to an answer. And that's really hard and scary for so many of us, because our livelihood depends on us being right. We get paid when we're right. And when we're wrong, we're worried we're going to get fired either by the client or the organization. But we all have to understand and admit, like, whether it's health or performance, it's a cliche term to say, but yeah, it's really complex. And so like, if we just honor that, we know we're not going to get it right the first time, but it requires series of educated guesses after educated guesses to solve the problem. And that so many things can be solved quicker than like, oh yeah, for example, I saw a client 2 days ago, and she's like, do you think I'll be able to run this year? And I didn't want to give her any false hope.
Right.
I think she could probably run in 3 to 4 weeks. Her problem is very solvable. She just has some like pain behind her shin splint, you could say. But I was like, yeah, probably within the next 2 to 6 months. And she was just in so much disbelief. And
because she'd been told otherwise, or
she'd been told otherwise, and it's been going on for 10 years.
Yeah.
Because she's been in the cycle of clinicians and coaches making bad choices.
Yeah.
Poorly informed choices.
Yeah.
And the stuff that her and I are doing right now, she's never tried before. So it's like, that's some pretty low hanging fruit. Like, for instance, there's a muscle that goes right behind the shin. There's 3 of them that are below the soleus and Achilles, your big toe flexor, the flexor that flexes your small toes, and something called your posterior tibialis. She's never isolated any of those. She's hardly ever done any work for the lower leg. Like, one doctor put her in a boot for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's me plus a rant.
Yeah. So that is a great starting point, because it helps me zoom out to what your methodology is, which helped me, I think, really want to connect with you and learn from you, and take that 3-day course that I took from you recently. It was a couple of weeks ago, right? I think it's about, I think there's several things you touched on there. One is the kind of paradigm that when someone goes to a strength and conditioning coach or a doctor or a bike fitter or a general, an athletic coach, whatever, there's this perception of externalization of power. And there's this sort of like bowing down to the worship or the altar of expertise. It's like, well, this person knows. I've had people say this to me, like, you know where my saddle should go when I'm doing a bike fit with them. And I'm like, no, we don't. It's
a collaboration.
Yeah.
Right.
Let's find out. And I think that the keys for that paradigm that people don't quite get are, I can bring things to the table. I can bring experience. I can bring my eye. I can see movement patterns. If I'm good, I can see what muscles are contributing to that, right? One of those things that comes to mind is joint angle dictates muscle function, which I think is from triphasic training. I modify that a little bit. I prefer to say joint angle indicates muscle function. It doesn't actually dictate it per se. Maybe you disagree, but so I'm looking at an athlete and I see how they make power on the bike, and then I bring all that to the table. What they bring is their own experience of living in their body. I can, no matter how many degrees I have or letters after my name or how many years of bike fitting I have, I can never, ever be more of an expert in what they feel.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of power in that. So I have to ask them, like, hey, how does that feel? And most of the time maybe they don't know. So I have to have the discernment to pick it apart and say, well, what I'm looking for is this sensation and that sensation. Can you feel this? Can you fire this? Can you pull on the pedal here and feel this muscle firing? And I can palpate it, for example. And then we start to pick apart, and then it's a process of trial and error, because they believe that I know the answer, like your saddle height is X, Y, and Z, or 742 millimeters or whatever.
But I think that's because they've been fed that so much.
Exactly.
Their life. Like, even from the very beginning with elementary school, like, and parenting, like, no, teacher knows best, parent knows best. They always have the answers.
Yes.
And we are just always, like from a Buddhist perspective, like, you always want to be the student. Mm-hmm. But there is, it can go too far.
Yep.
And as far as joint angle dictates muscle function, I don't agree or disagree. I just say it depends on the context.
Okay.
So there's an example in the course that I'll bring up with a cyclist. He was one of the USA riders. He had an 8% differential between his power. And, let me preface this right now. I don't know shit about bikes, but I know about movement. Mm-hmm. And so it had seemed like he just was like, I just push that much harder with one leg. And I'm like, but that doesn't align with your goals.
Or the demands of the sport.
Bikes
are symmetrical mostly.
Yeah. And like, that sounds like something a weekend warrior would say. That sounds something I would say on my bike. Like, I don't really care. Mm-hmm. I'm just there to have fun.
But he's performing at the world level.
Exactly. And so it's not that hard to find. I think you just need to look for it. So I film him from the side view of slow motion. And as soon as he pushes down with his left foot, he goes into a lot more dorsiflexion. Mm-hmm. So if we use that heuristic of joint angle dictates muscle function, we might assume that the soleus might be working harder because it's at a longer length. Longer lengths, oftentimes require more energy, more effort. But when I tested him further, we would need to see just how much force he can produce through that leg. And I didn't do a force plate test. I don't really care too much about those things for this. It was just like, hey, how heavy can you lift with that leg on a single leg calf raise? Mm-hmm. And he had nothing.
Yeah. And
so then I showed you I just put him in a position like he's pulling up on handlebars, and his forefoot is just on a 45-pound plate.
Yep.
And all I'm asking you to do is create tension from his quote unquote handlebars into his foot.
Yep.
And within a matter of weeks, it went down to like a 1 or 2% differential.
Yep.
So that might be the added nuance I would say with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And you just zeroed in, I think, on one of the single biggest, most common paradigms I see in bike fitting is this asymmetry that's propagated by that exact point, which is usually there's a dominant side. Not to give everybody the plot in advance, but there's usually a dominant side in cycling, and it tends to be more anterior chain quad dominant, and we get this lack of ability to control the ankle in that and transmit that power through and then that's how the asymmetry starts. That's how you get this twisting around the axis of the C2.
Okay. It seems similar to running. Like the calf and the lower leg is so ignored.
Yeah.
It's not a Instagram sexy lift. Like, nobody's
doing calf raises.
Nobody's doing calf raises and like getting 1 million views.
Right.
But ultimately with running and cycling, all the power is still going through the lower leg. Mm-hmm. It has to be transmitted. Even I do this with some of the Major League Baseball players I work with, where they do all the big sexy things, the glute work and the thigh work, and like they're squatting and reverse lunging hundreds and hundreds of pounds.
Yep.
Then I watch them pitch, and they still have to push through the forefoot.
Yep. Right.
And their calf just gives up. They can't do anything.
Yep. So all that power above the chain,
going into jello.
Yeah. Yeah. Blobs of jello. Exactly.
I think one of the things you and I think probably see eye to eye, just use different language for, is just where is force going in the body and for you on the bike.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Paul Chek famously had a case once where he helped a pro baseball player who was having similar like shoulder mechanic issues and challenges in the shoulder and throwing and pain and whatever. And Paul looked at him holistically and eventually figured out that he had hallux limitus on one side, which is big toe won't go into dorsiflexion, right?
Extension or flexion?
Sorry.
The toenail wouldn't come up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so he couldn't generate power through that foot, basically. So they did a bunch of work on his foot and got his toe to move, and then got some firing going on.
Oh, nice. It wasn't arthritic. He just didn't have access.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yep. Yeah. So this helps me think about, or makes me think about some of your concepts you have on your platform, including standards of strength. And a million years ago, when I started this podcast, I talked about making a list like that for cyclists. And it's been bouncing around in my head for 3 years, 4 years. And you have a nice list on your site, which I actually made some contributions to.
Sweet.
Or some suggested.
I don't know if I saw that.
Okay. Yeah. I was wondering if you did.
Yeah.
So, but I'd love to talk about that kind of idea and to zero in, maybe to start it off with the calf and foot. One of your standards of strength you offer is, can someone do 30 single leg calf raises full range in 60 seconds with one of the key points is we have to see wrinkles at the Achilles, which would tell us that when you go to do that calf raise and you push up off the step or whatever you're using, if we don't see wrinkles in the back of the Achilles, it tells you you're getting all of your calf raise from the midfoot or the toes.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
None in the ankle joint. And we need a sharing of load through those joints for it to be
exactly. So let me expand on that. So the main there's 7 muscles I think that can plantar flex the ankle, but the primary 2 are the soleus and the gastrocnemius, and those attach at the heel. And so listeners, if you're watching, you can turn your palm to face you, and then if you bend your wrist so that it
so your fingers come closer to your face.
Your finger comes closer to your face, you'll see that skin wrinkle. And I think skin is an amazing indicator of joint movement. And so if the soleus and gastroc are pulling on the places where they attach, like on the heel, you will see wrinkles happen in the back of the Achilles. And so then that indicates that, yes, that muscle is actually doing its job, which is contract. And then when you go down, eccentrically contract, or it shortens and then it lengthens. And then you hit the ground and maybe you relax. And so many people create substitutions.
Yeah.
The brain is a great problem solver. So if you need to lift your heel off the floor, you can do that through other joints.
Yeah.
The problem is that the midfoot joint and those muscles are not equipped for that kind of stress.
So they'll just tap out early, or you'll create a problem or a stress
tap
fracture.
Out early, they'll cramp. I mean, when I see that movement pattern, they could have Achilles tendonitis, they could have plantar fasciitis, they could have a Morton's neuroma, they could have a rigid big toe, they could have a number of problems. But the cause is the poor plantar flexion. And so this test not only indicates movement quality, but also strength and endurance. And I think this is going to be hard for a lot of people, but this is like bare bones. I don't care what you do. If you're just running around to pick up your kids, you need to be able to do this. You have any idea how many parents I hear tear their Achilles just chasing their kids?
Wow.
Like I had one client chasing his high school kid to go skimboarding, popped his Achilles.
Yeah.
And it goes overlooked. And people don't understand the physics of it or the biomechanics. And I mean biomechanics more in the true sense of the word, not the way it's been bastardized lately, but just like the force and equations that are going on there. And your Achilles is going to take about 9 times your body weight for a nanosecond when you run. And so that 30 calf raise test is like square one. Square one. Then we can start talking about jumping and hopping and your speed tolerance there.
So if you can't do that 30 full range calf races with wrinkles, you wouldn't even entertain the idea of jumping off a box or...
Probably not. I would do so cautiously.
Yeah.
Long runs.
It'd be cart before the horse. Is that fair? If you were like, I'm going to do a bunch of box jumps.
I mean, I don't...
We don't know.
No, it's like I just don't want to tell people what to do. And I don't know. Like maybe there's plenty of people in CrossFit who do box jumps and they just harbor a really high risk.
Yeah.
That's it. Sometimes I think of myself more as an insurance agent and I'm just assessing risk.
Right.
It's like, well, I don't know if you're going to bust your Achilles, but like speed typically degenerates tendon. About 80%, 80 to, I don't remember the exact study, but I think it's like 80 to 100% of people who tore their Achilles already had degeneration.
Yeah.
And that degeneration doesn't signal any pain.
Mm.
And the only way to regenerate tendon is through
Force.
heavy load.
Heavy load. So
or
that's
really, really long duration, like 10 minutes.
So super important concepts for people. Just to zoom out, one is that generally, would you say we want to understand the anatomy of the body, and we want, as a general principle, we want load sharing during exercise, right? And so that means that joints and tendons and muscles have to work properly. We can't have a calf raise without wrinkles, is one example.
Yep.
But then the other concept that's super important, you said, is speed degenerates the function of tendons. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. So we have this spectrum. So you want to improve the strength or function of your tendons. We need load, either high load or long duration load that's focused on the tendons, not the muscles.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can't do one without the other.
Right. But over time, with long duration, eventually the muscle fibers will tap out and you'll end up with tendon load. Is that?
You're still going to get tendon load. So you need the muscle to contract hard enough to pull on the tendon to create stress and regeneration. One of the studies that is very visual is you can imagine that a damaged tendon looks like tangled hair. And that the only way to untangle it is by making the muscle contract hard enough to tighten all the fibers.
To get them all,
make them all
parallel and aligned and tidy.
Exactly.
Tidy your tendons.
But one of the more illuminating and surprising studies is you can do really light loads, but for super long durations and get similar adaptations.
Yeah.
My only qualms with that is, again, your brain is solving the equation of force.
Right.
And while long durations can improve the density of your tendon, it's not really improving your capacity to handle those forces. So if you have to move really fast, if you're going to jump, that's 8 to 15 times your body weight and even more through your Achilles, if we're going to keep it centered on the Achilles. So let's say you do 10 minutes of calf raises in a day. You offload some of your body weight. That is not preparing your muscle and tendon for that 15 times your body weight when you do a depth jump or some sort of box jump or whatever.
So the way we would think about that in cycling training is, if you want to do an interval, let's say you want to improve your capacity to do some workload, right? So let's say you've got a 5-minute hill, you've got to go up really fast. You can either break that hill down into 1-minute chunks and go faster than pace, right? So 5 by 1 minute simplistically. And that would be effectively training intensively. Or you can train for 10 minutes at a slightly lower pace. That would be training extensively.
You could do both.
Well, right. Yeah. No, ultimately we do. So would you use similar terminology when you're talking about tendon load though? Or maybe I'm asking you to translate that for me.
So. Yeah. I mean,
does that make sense?
The way I simplify it for clients, and, excuse the cursing here, but it lands. I'm like, if you want an adaptation, you're going to have to go really fucking heavy or for a really fucking long time.
Yeah.
We got to go to some extreme.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot of stuff that happens good in the nebula's middle ground.
Yeah.
So generally that's 6 reps or less.
Okay.
The research would say 12 reps or more. I'm going to be a stickler and go like, no, let's talk about 20 and up.
For extensive.
Endurance.
Endurance.
Yeah.
So I think about it in terms of time under tension.
Great.
So 3 minutes is a nice target that we're taught in the check system for something with relatively small muscles and slow twitch fibers.
So 5 to 8 seconds per rep is what's suggested for strength. So if let's just say 5 seconds times 6, that's 300 seconds. Math's not my strong suit.
Sorry, say that again. 5.
So if we do one set of 6 reps times 5.
That'd be 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Yeah.
Right.
There we go.
Okay.
And then we times that by 5 sets.
Right.
Then we are getting 150 seconds. It's not that much.
Right.
But it's the intensity that's really high.
Right.
Now, if we're on the long side of things, like I'm probably going to talk about cumulatively more closer to 7 to 10 minutes for people who are trained.
Yeah.
Like,
you don't just start there, you build up to that.
If I'm seeing an athlete's parent and then it's like, yeah, my shoulder hurts. Like, okay, well, let's start a really light load and let's just do 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Like, again, this is just a little bit of common sense of like, okay, yeah, the research says this, but look at the person in front of you. you got to adapt the principle. But relative to them, 2 minutes is long. They've never done this before in their life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So one thing I think that comes up for me when we're talking about this type of conversation of to restate what you said earlier, which is like, generally speaking, to get adaptation, we're going to have to either go really fucking hard or really fucking long.
Yeah. I mean,
right. You got to push some envelope.
I'm too much of a control freak to like
kind of be in the middle ground.
Yeah. Why waste time and energy?
Yeah. So, but how do we discern when, like, if somebody comes in with an acute contact injury, that's one thing, right? You know, if they just got clocked in the knee and it's like, oh, geez, what's going on with their ACL? We can talk about that. I've
got a good case.
Okay, so let's do that for sure. But like, how do we discern between when pain is not doing, when we have to push through pain because pain does not equal harm versus, we might be actually, there's a tendon that's halfway, gone and we're going to rip the thing right off the bone, right? A ligament or whatever.
So I was working with an NFL player a number of years ago. I like this story. He had a lot of knee pain. And I'm just having him stand and like do a little bit of like a waiter's bow kind of thing. Just a little knee bend with some of his weight on the other leg. He's like, my knee hurts. I'm like, okay. I don't run away from it. I'm like, what do you think about that signal right now? Is that useful? Or is that a little overprotective?
Right.
People with chronic pain, we know that their quote unquote danger detector becomes hypervigilant.
Yeah.
And so it starts eliciting signals for pain in inaccurate times. Pain is a predictive mechanism and it's trying to prevent you from doing further damage. And this doesn't mean that I keep him in that position for a long time, but I do want him to have that conversation of like, right, this might not be useful, and almost telling the brain literally like wrong prediction.
Right.
Like you need to calibrate.
Yeah, recalibrate your.
But then I will try something else. So I might put somebody in like a crawling position, or a simpler one might be child's pose for a knee, where it's really, really low load.
But pretty extreme amount of flexion.
Yeah, extreme amount of flexion. And I'll say you're going to come in and out of child's pose for 5 minutes straight. And that can be a great access point to give the brain lived experience that, wait a second, we can bend our knee without hurting. And that can also offer a little bit of a calibration effect. Now, that's a very different conversation if somebody is like, yeah, when I try to dunk a basketball, my knee hurts. Well, okay, yeah, I mean, that's a really high amount of force. So let's have a different kind of conversation. Maybe you're unprepared for that. Maybe your tendon doesn't have the capacity for that. So we need to do a tendon loading protocol.
Yep. And
you can have somewhat of a rapid inoculation effect from like 45 seconds to 2 minutes of isometric before activity. So instead of taking, ibuprofen or something, what a lot of people can do is like, well, let's just find the problematic tendon. So do a little detective work. Then let's just load it for 2 minutes and then go do your sport.
Just load it isometrically?
Totally, yeah.
So if somebody had patellar stuff, you could put them in a deep lunge, for example.
Deep lunge, reverse Nordic, pistol squat.
Yeah.
Something like that. With knees, I tend to go to that deepest knee flexion and longest length of the quad.
Yeah.
Typically, I like extremes. It makes for a very clean scientific experiment of like, okay, we're going to put your quad in the longest length and then we're going to load it. Or what's the shortest length? Somewhere with an Achilles or an elbow, something like that.
Yeah, okay.
I think of it like very, it's almost like there's a spreadsheet in my head where I'm just literally crossing off the different variables that are available.
Right.
All these problems have a finite number of solutions. With an Achilles, like there's only 4 tendons there.
Yeah.
You guess. You just make a guess at one of them and load them. You've got a 25% chance of winning.
So you just find a way to isolate that tendon, put it under load, see what happens.
Yep.
See if it works.
Exactly. Trial and
hypothesis.
Pain. Yeah. So that's the other thing with pain is like, God, it can go away so quickly.
Yeah.
Like I am almost upset at some of the results that I get because it seems too good to be true. That, one day a person has pain and then the next day they don't. And I didn't wave a magic wand. I didn't do anything special. I don't think I did. All I did was some good critical thinking and like process of elimination, and I know how tissue adapts.
Yeah.
And that's it. Like,
Yeah.
I think it's very learnable and doable, and so many more people can do this. And like people that go to my courses are starting to reproduce those results.
Yeah. I've experienced it myself.
Sweet.
I had one of my first stumbled onto that was in 2001. I had a patellar debridement on this left knee. Debridement,
Whatever.
scraping of the tendon.
Yeah.
And came out of surgery, did the normal. I think they gave me a boot, but it was like an icy boot that moved the leg, so I used that for a couple of weeks or whatever. Mm-hmm. And this was when they were starting to figure out that isolating joints, locking them up after surgery wasn't maybe the best thing. Then it took 6 months to get your range of motion back. But I had a severely reduced range of motion and some pain in that knee afterwards, but I could tell it was just stiffness. It was post-surgery stiffness. The joint
Can
just
I interrupt you there?
Yeah.
So I've read a book called How Emotions Are Made, and I believe that this applies to pain, where one thing that she talks about is emotional granularity, that instead of saying shame, she uses a brilliant example from an author, and she titles the emotion the hatred of mirrors that comes in middle age. And I think that emotional granularity is also really useful with pain like this, where I've had my own knee pain and I try to apply that same process. I'm like, well, let's get a little more nuanced. What is the sensation? It's it just feels like a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
And it's so strange that the pain changes based on the label I attach to it.
Interesting.
Something anecdotal that I've been seeing and playing around with.
Yeah. I mean, I think that speaks to a really important point because, we have so many messages that we get. The one I use, because I'm 52, is you're standing in line at the grocery store and you look at Men's Journal or Men's Fitness, and there's some dude there who's tanned and, his abs are all airbrushed, or some chick in a bikini, and it's perfect hourglass, whatever. And consciously, you don't probably think of anything when you see that, even peripherally. But of course, your subconscious is aware of this. Yeah. It's this is what you should look like. People who listen to my podcast for a long time know that should is my least favorite word. I fucking hate it. Leaf blowers should. Need to die. Need to be assassinated.
Let's start a club.
T-shirt.
Yeah.
And so we take these images. Now, of course, it's social media bombards us with, some dude who's there doing whatever ab roll workout or, jumping off of a cliff on his mountain bike and going upside down or whatever badass stuff people are doing. And specifically in the hatred of mirrors category, it's well, why am I not that? Why I have this emotional sense that I should be more. And for a lot of people, I think the middle-age thing is also important because you're approaching some sort of midlife crisis point where you get to look back and realize all the things you've accomplished in your life, but at the same time, you're not a billionaire. Most likely you're not, maybe you don't have the most ripped abs. Maybe you have whatever, still a few pimples or a funny looking nose or whatever you've got that you don't like in the mirror. Mm-hmm. And that leads to this miniature self-crisis of fuck, that's it, or this is my presentation. And especially if you're an athlete, ostensibly, you've put time and energy into your life in a way that you think is promoting your own health and well-being. But of course, we're all human and we all have experiences where we have a little bit of flab in some place or, whatever, stinky feet or, whatever. And so it's there's this conflict. I think that's really interesting. So then what you're saying, what the point of this book is that we take an emotional label and we stick it onto our pain or dysfunction, our creaky back or our creaky knees or arthritic this or that.
I just have a bad back. What a limiting belief.
Right?
Wow, you're going to stop.
Yeah.
You're going to stop so many activities.
There's nothing bad about your back.
Yeah.
Is it perfectly healthy? Maybe not, but okay, do something about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So wait, go back to your knee.
So I had this debridement in 2001. They scraped the tendon. It was from a bad cleat, a cleat that had gone wonky 2 years prior when I was racing the Tour of Ireland, and I didn't really know it at the time. And I was on the podium in the race. It was a 9-day stage race. So I went way deep in that. The knee never quite bounced back from that. It was classic internal rotation, medial rotational instability challenge exacerbated by equipment. And so I'm in the boot and I'm doing the things, and then I get out and I'm walking around and I'm trying to start to ride a little bit and get going. And it just It's just stiff. Like, and I'm a guy who historically I can do child's pose, no problem. Or I can sit on the ground with my heels tucked under and knees fully bent and lay all the way back to the floor, no problem. Mm-hmm. Like I'm borderline hypermobile, maybe possibly Ehlers-Danlos fringe, periphery. But I can't even come close to that on the left knee. And I'm kind of stretching it, doing the normal quad stretches and my normal routine. It's just like not making any ground. And then I just have this instinct for whatever reason, I don't know why, this belief. I'm like, I just need to fucking bust through this. So I literally just do it. I just put my heels under my butt and I just go, here we go. And I just lay back bit by bit, further. And it's like, the pain is like 7, 8, 9, but I know that my patella is not going to go flying off into the sky. I know I'm not going to rip anything off. I'm not going to rip my quad. I don't know how I know this. I just do. And I laid there for probably 25 minutes in one shot. I mean, extreme long duration, went through all the like really painful 10, then it goes away, then it goes down to a 3, then it goes back up to a 10, then I'm pins and needles, then I'm like, can't feel anything, like numbness, and then normalcy returns. I stand up, it's really stiff. The next day, normal range of motion, like back to the floor again, boom. I mean, it was stiff and creaky, but I improved my range by 40% or something crazy in one shot. And I guess what's unusual about that is I just sort of had this instinct that I wasn't going to, rip my quad in half. I just went for it and it worked. And I've done that in other areas too. Like there's definitely, when you open your mind to the possibility that pain doesn't do harm, you can suddenly go, why does this fucking hurt? This is just a muscle that's really wound up and tight. It's just like, it's just doing this. And I just need to freaking reset the muscle spindle and light it up to the moon and prove to it that can do that. And I've had other moments too, where my knee's been a little niggly, like kind of vague sort of like yuckiness from hard training. And it's like, I need to reset the clock here. You just go do some really fucking hard deadlifts. Like maybe arguably too hard, like above capacity somehow, but you manage to squirm and get it done. And you walk out of the gym and you're like, oh, my knee doesn't hurt anymore.
Yeah. I mean, there's actually some evidence with this. Like I've seen some people doing like 315 on a single leg calf raise.
Wow.
But they're only controlling a descent and they have their buddies help lift it up.
Okay.
I mean, that what you're alluding to is a lot of the research I'm talking about with like, it takes a lot of forces to make a tendon feel better.
Yeah.
And the places that you're also pointing out are all a lot of connective tissue, a lot of tendon.
Right.
I think this would be a very different conversation if you're like, the muscle belly of my quad was really killing me. And
I went and did some crazy load.
Well, I bet you would have gotten a slightly different pain signal.
Mm-hmm.
I think part of the reason why you're like, I don't know why I can do it, but I believe I can, is just you've lived a life of a lot of movement, I gather.
Mm-hmm.
And that experience is really useful for your brain to make a good prediction. So you predict, like, I think I'll be okay. I mean, the same with me. Like, I have my own aches and pains from time to time, and then I have to problem solve it. And like, I operate under different rules, different set of rules that I give my clients. I'm like, it's like a 6 or 7 out of 10. I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
I know what I'm doing. Or like, no, I think this is actually going to make it feel better, even though it's like a little intimidating. Let's go heavier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think that speaks to that internal intuition that we sometimes have and need to cultivate about expertise of our own experience and body. Right.
And I want to, like, I've talked a lot in the last, 10 minutes, 20 minutes or so about really heavy, intense things. But I want to round that out with this idea of awareness and access that we talked about earlier, which is like, I will have somebody move at the 3% intensity level so that they can find their posterior tibialis, so that they can find a muscle in their elbow called their flexor carpi ulnaris. And once you have that access to that muscle that you can specifically load it, sure, then we can flood the system with a shit ton of weight.
Yeah.
Sometimes, not always.
Yeah.
So I want to just have this, grain of salt with like, no, it's not just heavy lifting that's going to fix everything.
Yeah.
Like part of the reason why I worked at your knee is that there are fewer tissues to stress there. Whereas if this was your elbow, if this is the inside of your elbow, this would be a very different conversation. Maybe it's your bicep, maybe it's your pronator teres, maybe it's any number of other muscles that are down there.
Yeah, or shoulder, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, most mobile and confusing joint in the body, arguably.
Oh, I love the shoulder.
It's cool.
I think the elbow is more
confusing.
They're more muscles.
Yeah, so confusing is my own subjective.
Yeah, I've also my background is with volleyball, and so I've just seen so many overhead athletes. So like the shoulder feels simple to me.
Okay, so standard of strength. I asked you this during the course.
Yeah.
Like I'm always on the hunt for this because I think this is one of the biggest challenges we struggle with as coaches, movement coaches, or people who want to help people move better and not be in pain is cueing is a whole art, right? The subtle art of cueing, and how do you help someone find access to a muscle they've never really fired individually, or how do you get them to move in the way you would like them to move because you think they'll help them move better? And to that end, I think one of the brilliant tools we have are self-corrective exercises. So our short list is hanging, right? Hanging from stuff.
Yeah.
So I asked you about this during the course. Is hanging a self-corrective exercise? And your response was maybe with a few caveats, yes.
Yeah, for the most part, it can be, especially from one arm.
Yeah.
Everyone should be able to hang from one arm.
Standards of strength.
I don't care if you're grandma. Like I've made plenty of trips to China, and there are 80-year-olds, who
can do it
on playground parks hanging from one arm. Like age is an excuse.
Yeah.
And then from there, my heuristic that I operate under that works for average population, not anybody extremely light or extremely heavy, but if you take 20% of your body weight, so let's use a 200-pound person, that's 40 seconds from one hand.
That's a long one-handed hold.
It is.
Yeah, so I'm 150 pounds.
Yeah. So 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Yeah. I've been playing with it since our course. I'm getting there, but not 30 seconds yet.
Yeah. And so for most people, the grip is going to fatigue first.
Yeah.
That's fine, but it's not just about grip. It's still about the integrity of the shoulder, just like a squat is not just about the foot, but the rest of the leg. The king of, self-corrective exercises is the one arm pull-up.
Yeah.
Because you have to put your center of mass underneath your hand, which is also would be called your center of pressure. And that adduction of pulling your elbow toward your midline lengthens the rotator cuff in just the right way, where your humerus, your upper arm bone, relates to your shoulder blade gets really, I want to say, harmonious. And so often what I see is people, when they reach overhead or hang, their shoulder blade either moves too much or not enough.
Yeah.
Okay. And this isn't about scapular stability or like these catch-alls that get thrown around here. Those are way too ambiguous. And the one-arm pull-up, I've found in almost all cases, gets the relationship right with how much that shoulder blade moves in relation to the arm.
Okay. And then you also talk about pronation of the grip and how people, when they make a fist, like we want to see this nice even knuckle line here.
Yeah.
For those of you who are watching the video, you can see, but if you make a fist and face it towards the mirror, you want to see those four knuckles be flat.
Like an even mountain range.
Yeah.
Yeah. Except for like usually the pinky and the ring finger like drop off, like Mount St. Helens was inside one of your knuckles and just blew off the knuckle. So I've been thinking about the pinky and ring finger since maybe 2016. And initially I didn't know what it was about. But I saw it correlate with almost everybody who had some sort of elbow or shoulder problem, especially elbow issues. This is kind of some of my golden secrets. I work with all the baseball players. So for one, when you're hanging from a bar, for instance, your pinky and ring finger are likely to be the first thing to go.
Yep.
They don't your ring and middle finger just have a much bigger and better line of pull. But the fibers that pull on your pinky and ring finger connect at the inside of your elbow.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the muscles that pulls all four of the small fingers down looks kind of like this wonky teardrop. And the fibers that pull the index and the middle finger down connect more at the middle of the forearm. And if you're just listening, you can feel this. So
it's like your Popeye muscle.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm just resting my right hand or my left hand on top of my right forearm.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to squeeze my index and ring finger.
Mm.
And if this is hard for you to feel, then this is also an opportunity for you to have better powers of discernment, better bodily awareness.
Mm.
Okay. So you'll feel the whole muscle belly contract if you just pull that middle and ring finger down into your palm.
Mm-hmm.
But if you then pull on the pinky and ring finger, you'll feel something very different under the hand that's palpating your forearm.
Mm-hmm.
And those fibers go down toward the middle of the elbow.
Yep.
Now, I nearly jumped out of my desk chair when I found the first research article among baseball players that showed a correlation with ring finger strength and UCL tears.
Mm.
And then I texted everybody that I knew in the MLB of oh my God, it's finally here.
Yeah.
Finally some data to back up what I've been saying for a long time.
Yeah.
And so bringing this back down to hanging, almost everybody that I've worked with, whether a baseball player or not, elbow player or not, or elbow athlete or not with elbow problems, when they ensure that their pinky and ring finger stay around whatever implement they are grabbing, almost across the board, everyone's like, well, at first it was hard, but now I can do way more than normal.
Mm.
One of the baseball players started hitting 33% more home runs.
Wow.
And I was like, why do you think you could do that? There's so many other things going on. I'm my own biggest devil's advocate. I'm like, there's no way this is doing anything. And he's like, no, dude, we just did so much grip work that I feel like I could just grip the bat tighter so I could swing faster. As if the grip was his limiting, the thing limiting.
The rate limiting factor, which plays into our conversation about foot and ankle being the transmitter force when you're running, walking.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
With a baseball player or
it's the endpoint.
It's the endpoint. A batter with a pitcher, it's their fingers. It drives me insane so a pitcher is putting more than their entire body weight through their shoulder when they throw. Yeah. And then that's going to go into their index finger and middle finger to throw a ball for millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars.
So first principle, we want to load share, not put all the force through 2 of the 4 digits, right?
But also we're not going to get anybody to throw the ball with all 4 fingers.
Right.
For fastball.
Ah, right. Okay.
So you can't beat them. So join them.
Right.
You have to, you have nobody's training their fingers in baseball.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Their idea of grip training is so
just one of those grippy hand things, maybe
squeezing more rice than a Vietnamese farmer, rice farmer, or squeezing those things and doing things that are just way too light. And again, it's this idea of people don't appreciate or understand what the body's really doing and how much force it takes to prepare it for those activities.
So in cycling, I'm thinking about my track cyclists in particular, because so I have athletes who race pursuit, kilo, team, sprint, these kinds of things. So
some of those people are jacked. Right?
Massively jacked. Yeah. Right. So I don't train anyone who specifically focuses on the sprint events. Like track cycling is just like track running, where you've got the sprinters and then you have the 10,000 meter.
Right.
Right. But in track cycling, the phenotypes are massively different. They're almost different athletes.
Yeah.
But they all have the same demands. Endurance riders or sprinters have to do a standing start, which means you're in a huge freaking gear from a dead ass stop.
Yeah.
And so that's basically a split stance deadlift with a barbell because your bars are connected.
What's the force they're putting out there?
I mean, massive. So it's interesting because the peak watts can sometimes be quite high and sometimes not as much.
Give me ballpark. I mean
anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 watts.
Yeah. Okay.
But 1,500 peak is probably, for someone who's got a really good start, you're in that neighborhood.
Cool.
But because there's this weird torque band that is sometimes missing, unless you do a ton of standing starts. Like for me, my best torque would come in a moment where it's a relationship of force and cadence. So on the road, I could go out and do a sprint. And if I'm kind of going the right speed in the right gear, I can go whack and hit it and get my peak, which back in the day when I was a younger rider, 1200 watts, 1300 watts was my peak power for a single pedal stroke. And I'm 64 kilos. Back then I was probably 61 kilos or something.
Yeah. I mean, that's a big power to weight ratio.
It's pretty good, for a sprinter, but I'd get smoked by real sprinters. Right. Yeah. So I'm in the neighborhood of like 15 watts per kilo. Real sprinters are like more towards 20, low 20s. So, but then on the track, you've got, this situation where because you start from a dead stop in a huge gear, the first few strokes are really torque heavy, probably too torque heavy for most cyclists to produce their maximum power. You have to wait till the cadence lifts. So maybe you're into, weirdly, even though most people see a velodrome as having two corners, really, we like to make it complicated. We say there's four. So there's turn 1, 2, 3, and 4.
That makes sense.
So you go between 1 and 2, and somewhere in there, you might hit your peak torque.
Interesting.
Or peak power, because your torque's starting to get low enough and your cadence starting to get high enough. And so they kind of have this crossover point. It's like a power band in an engine, right?
Okay.
But confusingly, at that point in a 250 meter velodrome, you're also on a banking. So the bike's leaning as you're starting to rock and your center of gravity is coming forward. The physics of it are actually really quite complicated. Then you come out of turn 2 and the bike goes more upright. The velodrome has less of a banking. And then you can really hit it down the backstretch before you sit. Everyone will sit down in the saddle before turn 3.
Okay.
So somewhere in that, between the exit of turn 2 and the entrance of turn 3, you would hit your peak power normally, depending on the athlete and the gear and the event and some other stuff.
Okay, so I understand the context. Now bring it back down to, force.
Right.
Yeah.
So really what I was trying to get at is you're doing a split stance deadlift off the line in a huge gear, and you're trying to accelerate the bike as quickly as possible. You can't shift. You've got one gear. You better have freaking good, strong grip strength and a strong anchored shoulder that can pull on that bar like freaking crazy. You've got 2 arms to work against one leg on each stroke.
It's a closed loop between your feet and your hands.
Yep.
Right. And
it's open chain at the feet.
Yes.
Closed chain at the hands.
Yeah. You still have to, I think of it as like, you're only able to push as hard as you're able to grip on the handlebars.
That's a key sentence right there.
Yeah, that's how I've come to understand.
Steve, are you listening? Talking to one of my athletes.
Come to understand it with the very few cyclists that I've worked with, who never.
You can only push as hard as you can grip on the bars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, and if you can't pull, you're not going to there's going to be some sort of weak link in your chain.
Mm-hmm. It's got to be just like when you have a really good deadlift form. Like for me, one of the essences of coaching good deadlift, people injure themselves, is they push with the hips or the knees, quads or the hips, whatever, first, before they've fully tensioned the chain all the way to the hands. Like rule number 1 is like, take all the slack out of the chain from the feet all the way to the hands. That entire thing has to be connected. Then you can pull on the bar.
Yep.
Right.
Same thing if we look at a microscope within, if we bring back to that calf conversation, like the cyclist I worked with that dropped his heel when he started pushing, that's where his slack got removed.
Exactly.
But it was very soft and weak. And so this also talks about a difference in form, I think, that at least I've talked about with my cyclists, where on the bike, your back's going to be rounded. It's just going to be there so that you have space to flex your hips. But out of the saddle, you don't have to round your back.
Because your center gravity comes
it's
forward.
Like a different mode should engage.
Yeah.
Because the more your spine is neutral, and I'm not the guy to say like you need to live here. I love training the spine at different end ranges. You are going to have more access into your hips and your legs if you are able to then straighten your spine out into that power position. Yeah. So it's almost like there's 2 different techniques. Yeah. The other thing that I would say also is like, and this is big in run sprinting, is those first 2 steps in run sprinting is the only times where the knee is going to get straight. And in the few sprinting analyses that I've done alongside my cycling clients, it seems to be similar. In those first few steps when the cadence is low, you're getting much more full extension of the knee, and getting that longer
when you're out of the saddle. Yeah.
When out of the saddle. And then as you increase, the knee is not getting straight each and every time. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. And also when cadence gets higher, people tend to curl up into a little ball, which probably has to do with muscle length being less expensive at shorter
or they like their
length.
abs more than their psoas.
Yeah.
So they're pulling more with their abs instead of their hip flexor.
Yeah. Yeah, that could be. I mean, there's a really old belief. I did a podcast a number of years ago called 99 Italian Wives' Tales About Bike Fitting, most of which need to be assassinated. Because there's so much folklore and myth in, I don't mean myth in the good way, in cycling bike fitting. And one of it is that it's good and normal the cycling term is slide forward on the rivet. So when you go hard, especially on the flats and your cadence is really high, you slide forward on the saddle and curl your trunk, posterior rotate the pelvis, and you turn into a little meatball and do this.
When you're trying harder, like more force.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So to me, I've had debates about this with some of my colleagues for sure. And I'm talking colleagues who are educated in science, but also world level track racers, not just lab rats or lab people. I didn't mean that derogatorily. Because there's definitely two pathways in my world of coaching. There are people who live behind the science wall who take lactate values and run Met carts, but they've never done a bike race in their life. And they know a lot of stuff. And then there's people like me who have raced for 35 years. And, I know a lot of stuff and we all know stuff, but, and neither of us can ultimately access all the stuff that the other side has seen. And ultimately we have to work collectively and collaboratively to figure out problems. But sometimes there's a wall between those two worlds that just irritates the fuck out of me. It's like, guys, we can all have the same conversation here. I know that I don't speak science and
it's a difference. Yeah. I mean, I see it as a difference in language, but also an attachment to those languages. Attachment
to letters after your name sometimes.
Letters after your name, or so in the skill acquisition space, there's a term called affordances. Or let's talk about ecological dynamics.
What the fuck does that mean?
Exactly. When I'm like, well, the environment that the athlete is in matters, and that's going to change how they make different choices.
Sure.
No. It's ecological dynamics.
Ah, right.
So, there's this really strange attachment to these words within our industries.
25-cent words. Yeah.
As a writer, I would say I've never read one book on writing that's ever promoted a more complex term or sentence when a simple one does better. And ultimately, I think we all have obligations to teach, especially if you are a harborer of knowledge. And so I think it's on both people on either sides of the fence to then communicate in ways that the other can understand.
100%.
And the more people that we have with different expertises, ultimately that serves the people we're trying to help, which is the client. And the athlete.
It doesn't do any good if you're dropping 25-cent words all over the place and they can't remember what you said.
I think similar to you, I don't want to sit on a computer at a spreadsheet all day.
Right.
And I've created a career that doesn't require that. But I also know, I have gaps in my training. Do I test lactate thresholds? And no. And early in my career, I tried going down that route and I found too many loopholes and problems. I was doing jump testing every day to assess their daily power. And I'm like, but the dude has a newborn at home and got no sleep.
Right. What good is it? Yeah.
Who cares?
Yeah.
I agree. It's not 100%. Data
worth hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
We can bury ourselves in all these obtuse standards, and cycling is victim to that sometimes too. It's like, well, we have to know. So we have to isolate. So we're going to put somebody in a lab on a bike that isn't theirs and try to duplicate the position. Right. So you're in this erg with a different Q factor and, different handlebars and whatever. And then you put masks and poke them with needles and all the things. And it's like, what do we know? Well, we know that this is what I did when I was on this ergometer with a bunch of people yelling at me in white lab coats. Does that mean anything when I'm going hard up the side of a mountain? I mean, probably there's certainly some percentage of overlay there, but this is all, for me, so much of this is a fool's errand.
I think it's good to have the data.
It can be.
But it also shouldn't drive all the decisions.
Yeah.
And it depends on the sport, on a much different level at Formula One. They exist purely on spreadsheets and data.
Such a data heavy sport.
But it has to be.
There's so much.
There's
it's one of the only sports that's more data heavy than cycling, I think.
Yeah.
Although cycling trying like hell to become that way.
I think there's still a lot to be said about the driver's feel. So currently right now, like there's two Red Bull drivers. There's obviously Max Verstappen, for those who know. And then if you're also watching, Drive to Survive, like the rest of us, there's this new kid, Liam Lawson. Mm-hmm. And the Red Bull car has been made for Max. And he is driving on a knife's edge, and he likes that. One of the other F1 drivers made a really good metaphor where if you change the settings on your computer mouse to the most sensitive, and you move your finger an inch and it's all the way up in the corner, that's how that Red Bull car drives. Yeah. And this new kid can't do it, obviously, because he's not Max Verstappen. Mm-hmm. And so even though they have all the data in the world, like, I don't know, he's still crashing a multi-million-dollar car these last 2 weekends. And I just wonder, like, well, what if you made the car a little softer so this guy could play jazz with the car, if you will, and like adapt instead of have no room to bring it back once the car slips. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to cycling, I don't know enough, but not all data is important. Mm-hmm. It's which data matters. It might be really good to have that data when the shit does inevitably hit the fan, so you can look back at 3 months data of like what went wrong and implement a new solution. But I think there's way too much stress on data, and I think a lot of people are attaching their career security to that. I know at least in the stick and ball sports, where I have more connections, there's a lot of career insecurity masquerading as data science. Mm-hmm. Of like, well, we made the right decisions based on the data, so you can't fire me. Like, the athlete still got hurt, and you still lost. Mm-hmm.
I mean, unfortunately, that's endemic in sports. Like, ultimately, people have to protect their jobs to some degree, right?
Totally.
And we can't blame them. They've all got mortgages and kids. So.
Exactly.
But cycling is the same. It's like, well, we could take a risk here, but most people aren't Tiger Williams. He's infamous for many things, but one of the things that I
don't even know who he is.
The golfer.
Tiger Woods.
Thank you.
I thought Tiger Williams. Yeah, okay.
My bad.
No worries.
Juxtaposition of words. I do this all the time. But he's known for changing his stroke on the spot. Yeah. Like mid-season, he'll be like, I've figured out that this subtle change in my posture or whatever, I'm making shit up about a golf swing, will, hopefully gain me this in 3 months. And everyone's like, but dude, you've got this fucking tournament in 2 weeks. And he's like, I don't care. He can afford to do that. But also it's most athletes, even at his level, won't make that choice.
I don't think they have the confidence to do so.
Or the love for improvement.
Yeah.
Right? For me, that's what it's
become
about.
Toxic.
Of course.
That's what I think we've probably seen.
Yeah.
Like, I know there's a few people that I know within the golf world who might have mentioned, like, he might have trained a bit too much or too hard.
Yeah.
Where it gets to be problematic. And I don't know. I think the center is more on the topic of adaptability. Data is information to make different decisions. You gather data along the way and make a different decision along the way. If you find yourself attached to one thing or the other for the wrong reasons, that's where I think you run into problems. Yeah. If your egos get in the way between the data and the action and the choice, then that's another problem.
Yeah, how I think about that is the love affair that cycling has with data, and how the sport has become something where a coach will write a workout for an athlete. The workout goes into a workout builder, which means that for a 90-minute workout, the first 20 minutes are in between 181 and 194 watts. The next 15 minutes are between this and that, et cetera. You do it in intervals between 301 and 323. Yeah. It's like these super precise obtuse points. You go out on a road and try to ride at 323 watts. Anyone with any experience knows that makes no fucking sense at all. But riders are now just staring at their head units relentlessly, trying to. So this is also about externalization of power. It's like, dear mommy, daddy, did I do it right? Did I do it good? Do I get gold stars? Do I get 5 or 0?
Is that choice and information only useful for training or for also in the race?
Well, that's an even bigger problem. Some people get confused about that, then they think that the objective of a race is to make power, which is incorrect. The objective of a bike race is to cross the line first.
Yeah.
And sometimes to do that, you make less power, of course.
One scene that I'm thinking of right now is, did you ever see the movie The Boys on the Boat?
No.
It's about the American rowing team around the time of the Nazi Olympics.
Oh, wow. Do we get to go into movie quote land now?
I don't know the quotes well enough. There's also a book, and I hear the book's fantastic, and I'm pissed that I saw the movie before knowing there's a book.
Right.
But what I was astounded by is that the coxswain is like 38. Okay, now 41, 42, and they're talking strokes per minute.
Uh-huh.
All of these guys know exactly what that feels like.
Wow.
And I'm just blown away.
That's super cool.
Because that's such a refined distinction.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if that externalization of focus could get in the way of, I don't know, make something up, so please course correct me, could get in the way of a cyclist knowing exactly what the feeling is like before their lactate threshold is.
You're exactly dead on. Like
in a race, because they're not, I don't know if they have that tech with them in a race, or if they can't look at it all the time because they're worried about who's
crashing or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So some of that is true. You can't always look at the power meter or heart rate when you're in a race, but the next wave is coming because people are using continuous glucose monitors now. I think the next wave will be a continuous lactate monitor, and that's going to be even worse because people are just going to want to look at their head unit all the fucking time.
Yeah.
And if you're racing a mountain bike race, obviously that's problematic. There's like trees and stuff.
Yeah, but, I mean, I imagine one of my clients, and I'm like, oh God, please don't look at your bike. Don't look at your bike.
Yeah. I made that mistake in 1994. I got my first SRM and immediately ran into a parked car. But that's the first power meter ever made. So we have a situation where, as a junior rider, I didn't have anything as a junior, nothing, just a cyclometer, which was time and distance and speed. Mm-hmm. That was it. So I'd go out and ride, and you're trying to figure out internally, like, how am I gaining fitness? Is my training working or not?
Yeah.
And one of my training partners was this guy, Jonathan Vaughters, who that name probably doesn't mean anything to you, but he runs the EF team now, Education First World War team, which is who I work for. And we used to go out and ride up our local hill that was like 2 miles from his house. And our subjective assessment was, if you can go up that hill the day before the race in your big chain ring and feel good, then you were probably going to have a good race the next day. But if you went up that hill and felt like shit, or you had to use a little chain ring, then it was like, this is not good. Or hopefully the pendulum swings the other way and you were just a little tired and you needed to get it out of your legs. Huh. It was that subjective, a hill that you use all the time.
Yeah.
And now people look at their power meter and they see it as, if my power's in this range, then I'll succeed. And if it's not, I won't. But they're losing the litmus point, the central point of perceived exertion. And for me, power is output. Heart rate is response to load. And perceived exertion is the third data point that is fed by the other two.
Yep.
And people now, unfortunately, think that power is the necessary objective of training. And it's not. Power is a proxy for physiological load, which is what we're actually trying to do during training. It's a proxy. Yeah. It's just one way for us to get our heads wrapped around what's happening during training. Nothing more. So let alone people understanding or intuiting the subtle passing through LT1 or LT2. Like this is the physiological landscape we give a shit about. Yeah. When you increase intensity, where are you on that spectrum? Are you between LT1 and LT2? Are you well above LT2? That you usually know when you are. Yeah. But this is what we care about. And this is what the body feels and registers as strain, right? Lactate levels.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I get so nervous with the exporting of agency.
Yes.
And awareness,
Yeah.
A loose acquaintance and guy I deeply respect. His name is Brian McKenzie. Mm-hmm. And he and I had a few conversations, and he's really big in breath work and that kind of training.
Okay.
And he and I are walking in Santa Cruz. This is once upon a time when I had a podcast, and I hosted his Art of Breath course. And he's like, it's all to get people more aware.
Yeah.
And I was blown away. I was like, oh man, that's huge. And I think when it comes to data, it's like, just don't let the machine use you. We could have the same conversation with AI as far as today.
Yeah.
Like, it's a tool, let it continue to be a tool, but like, it would be really fun on a maybe less consequential training where I'd like, okay, don't look at any of your data and just know where you are in the training and see how accurate you are with your predictions.
I play this game all the time with my athletes. I started playing it years ago with me and be like, all right, I think I'm at 175 watts, down 173. Then you have the right relationship with the tool because it can inform your knowledge, but you're also intuiting the effort. That's the point. That's the point of technology, is to help you learn something about yourself or refine intuition about yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I play this game with my athletes too. Sometimes I'll have them do intervals without power. And
how do they respond when you're like, you take that away?
A lot of times they're like, I have no idea. They're terrified, or they just feel like they're stabbing in the dark, which is a real sign that we need to do more of that work. Attention, well dippers. Did you know that I offer a unique service at my studio in Boulder, Colorado? An integrative fitting is the culmination of my experience and understanding that helps an athlete have a deeper insight into their relationship to cycling and movement. This is understood in the context of how the dream, goal, or objective aligns the client's choices and habits. The psyche, the environment, and drive will all influence the current expression of athletic ability. As we understand these factors, we can shape and direct athletic potential. What this means in a practical sense is that we spend about 6 hours working together, including a short or outdoor ride. We will film you on and off the bike, and we will discuss an extensive intake questionnaire. You will leave the fitting with a unique perspective on your function and with actionable pathways to improve your performance. This service was created specifically to help cyclists who have been through various fitting sessions and have had unsuccessful or unsatisfactory results. We dig deeper to find more meaningful outcomes. If you are interested in knowing more about an integrative fitting, please visit my website, colbypierce.com, where you can book an appointment. Epilogue. I want to share a few brief thoughts about the inception of cycling and alignment. The purpose of this podcast is for me to get 3.5 decades of hard-fought lessons out of my skull. Some of them through my own research and reading. Some of them I've been taught through mentors and colleagues, other riders, other racers. A lot of it, a massive amount of it, was simply trial and error through my own stubborn methods. And that has amassed a certain amount of experience and knowledge, understanding. And while I think I'm reasonably smart and I know quite a bit of stuff, I want to make it clear that the opinions that I share on this podcast are belief systems built on what I've experienced to this point. And that some of those opinions are pretty strong, but they are also loosely held. That is to say that if I learn more about a topic and have a greater level of clarity or understanding, then my old belief systems will be abandoned and I will now operate under that newfound knowledge. So I'm not here to tell people all the things that I know. I'm here to explain what I've learned to this point. And there's a big difference. Also, that is the intent when I discuss things on the pod with guests, is to learn from them and have a discourse. Because if we can't have a discourse as adults, then we've lost one of the basic tenets of modern society. Even if we disagree, we ought to be able to, in most cases, shake hands and walk away. Because after all, this is sport we're talking about, and while sport is training for life, it's nothing to get too upset over. The purpose of the podcast is to help me help other people, and specifically to help them actualize their highest potential by illuminating a path that enables alignment with their truth, their intent, and their coherence. That's really the end goal. So I'm grateful for your listening. My intent is also not, to be clear, to gain an audience or become popular or gain social status in any way. I don't care about that stuff. That said, if you feel an episode that you have heard will help someone you know, please share it with them. That helps us reach the end goal, which is to help more people. Thank you for listening. I'm grateful for your time and attention. Blessings.